Dr. Morgan sat at a cafe table, pretending to review medical journals while actually monitoring the life signs of Nova, the youngest Luminari juvenile who was concealed in a specialized container disguised as standard medical equipment beside her. The risky plan had been Nova's idea. The juvenile had revealed that they could sense others of their kind across significant distances and had detected a faint resonance from somewhere in the station's commercial district. Lieutenant Powell and Commander Wolf were positioned at different entry points, while Ambassador Wexler remained in the secure medical bay with the other juveniles, monitoring Nova's condition remotely. "Any changes?" Powell's voice came through Eliza's discreet earpiece. "Nothing yet," she replied softly. "Nova says the resonance is steady but weak." "Maddox just entered the plaza from the north entrance," Wolf reported, looking very pleased with himself for someone whose smuggling operation was just compromised. Eliza resisted the urge to look in that direction. According to their investigation, Director Maddox was meeting with representatives from Helios Quantum Technologies today, supposedly about station expansion projects, but they suspected otherwise. Nova's container suddenly emitted a soft pulse that only Eliza could detect through her medical interface. "Movement," she murmured. "Nova's picking up a stronger resonance coming from the East Service corridor." Powell's voice was tense. "That corridor leads to the private docking bays if they're moving more juveniles." "I see it," Wolf cut in. "Cargo trolley with specialized containment fields, registered to maintenance but moving way too fast." Eliza's heart raced. "That's them, moving more children before we can secure the evidence." "Hold positions," Wolf ordered. "Let's see where they go." The cargo trolley crossed the plaza, piloted by a station worker in standard uniform. As it passed near Director Maddox, he gave the slightest nod of acknowledgement before continuing his conversation with the Helios representatives. Nova's container pulsed more urgently. "They're distressed," Eliza reported, her voice tight. "Whatever's in that container, they're in pain." "Approaching Private Dock 7, Powell reported. "There's a Helios corporate shuttle docked there. Manifest says it's picking up equipment prototypes." "They're changing their export method," Wolf concluded. "Using corporate channels instead of cargo routes since we intercepted the last shipment." The pieces clicked together in Eliza's mind. They're not just changing methods, they're accelerating. Maddox knows we're onto him, so he's trying to move as many juveniles as possible before we can stop him. A sudden spike in Nova's readings made Eliza gasp. Nova just picked up at least 12 distinct Luminari signatures in that container. They're dying. "That's it, we move now," Wolf ordered. "Security teams to Private Dock 7, medical team on standby." As the carefully orchestrated operation sprang into action, Eliza stayed with Nova, monitoring the juvenile's connection to the others. But something felt wrong. The timing was too convenient, the transport too obvious. "Commander," she said urgently, "this doesn't feel right. Why would Maddox risk moving them in broad daylight after we already intercepted one shipment?" "Because we're not supposed to be watching him," Powell replied. "He doesn't know we've connected him to the operation yet." "Or," Eliza said slowly, a chill running down her spine, "because it's a diversion." At that moment, Nova's container emitted a pattern of pulses that the translation matrix rendered as pure panic. "The others," Eliza gasped. "The juveniles in the medical bay, they're in danger." She was already running, ignoring the startled looks from plaza visitors. Through her earpiece, she heard Wolf rapidly reassigning teams, but the secure medical bay was on the opposite side of the station from the private docks. Ambassador Wexler's frantic message confirmed her worst fears. "Intruders in the medical bay. They have disabled the security systems." Eliza ran faster than she'd ever run in her life. Nova's container clutched against her chest, her mind racing with terrible possibilities. Had they underestimated Maddox? Had they been outplayed? As she rounded the final corner to the medical bay, the sight that greeted her made her skid to a halt. 3 armed figures in station security uniforms lay unconscious on the floor. Standing over them, His uniform torn and a bleeding cut across his forehead, was Dr. Victor Harmon, the quiet, unassuming geneticist from the research level whom Eliza had barely spoken to in the 2 years they'd both been on the station. Behind him, the door to the juvenile's chamber stood open, but the young luminari inside were unharmed, their crystalline forms pulsing with agitated light patterns. "Dr. Morgan," Harmon said, his voice surprisingly steady for someone who had just taken down 3 armed attackers. "I believe Director Maddox may have compromised more of station security than we initially thought." Eliza stared at him, then at the unconscious attackers. "How did you?" "Before I was a geneticist, I served 10 years in Earth Special Forces," he said simply. "Old habits." Ambassador Wexler emerged from the chamber, their forms cycling through colors of relief and gratitude. "Dr. Harmon protected our young at great risk to himself." A realization dawned on Eliza. "You've known about this operation." Harmon nodded grimly. "I've been gathering evidence for months. There's more to this than just Maddox and Helios Quantum. This goes all the way to the Galactic Commerce Commission. They're attempting to monopolize quantum computing technology by exploiting the Luminari's natural abilities." The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but too slowly. The diversion at the docks, the attack on the medical bay, Maddox was tying up loose ends, removing evidence. "Powell Wolf," she said into her comm unit, "we have a much bigger problem than we thought." As sirens blared throughout the station and security teams scrambled to respond to multiple crises, Director Maddox slipped quietly onto the corporate shuttle, a data crystal containing all the research from the Luminari experiment securely in his pocket. The shuttle detached from the station without incident, its pilot unaware of the true nature of their passenger or cargo. Maddox smiled as he looked back at Nexus Station growing smaller through the viewport. By the time Morgan and her allies unraveled the full extent of the conspiracy, he would be safely ensconced in Commerce Commission headquarters, his position secured by the valuable research he'd delivered. He had underestimated the human doctor once. He wouldn't make that mistake again. What he failed to understand, however, was that he hadn't just made an enemy of Dr. Eliza Morgan. He had awakened something ancient and terrible in the human species, the unrelenting fury that came when those under their protection were threatened. And that fury was already spreading throughout the station, throughout the Alliance, creating a storm that would soon engulf him and everyone associated with his crimes. The resistance forms. The secure conference room in Nexus Station's medical wing had become their unofficial headquarters over the past 72 hours. Holographic displays covered every surface, showing shipping manifests, staff records, and security footage. Dr. Eliza Morgan rubbed her tired eyes, the stimulants in her system barely keeping exhaustion at bay. 17 shipments, Lieutenant Powell said, highlighting a pattern in the data. Same falsified credentials, similar container specifications. This is organized crime on a massive scale. Ambassador Wexler's crystalline form rippled with colors that indicated deep distress. "Each container could have held more of our young. How many have we failed to protect?" Eliza studied the medical data she'd compiled on the 5 rescued Luminari juveniles. They were recovering slowly in a specialized treatment bay, their crystalline matrices gradually healing. The youngest, whom she'd mentally nicknamed Nova, had begun communicating more clearly as their condition improved. "The trace elements I found in their systems are components of experimental quantum computing technology," she said, bringing up her analysis. "Someone is trying to use the Luminari's natural crystalline structures to build advanced computers." "More than that," came a new voice. Commander Jaina Wolf of the Galactic Alliance stepped into the room, her uniform marking her as part of the recently arrived investigative team. "They're trying to harvest the Luminari's living matrix itself." Powell rose to greet the commander whom he'd worked with before. "Jaina, glad the Alliance is taking this seriously." "Trafficking in sentient beings gets our attention fast," Wolf replied grimly, "especially when it involves experimenting on children." Eliza brought up new data from her scans. The pattern of degradation in the juveniles suggests they were subjected to multiple extraction attempts. They were being kept alive just enough to regenerate between procedures. The room fell silent, the horror of the revelation settling over them like a shadow. This level of operation, with this kind of sophisticated cover-up, Powell began, has to involve someone with high-level access, Wolf finished. We're looking at station administration. Ambassador Vexler's form pulsed with controlled rage. I have received word from the Luminari Collective. 7 nursery groups have disappeared in the past cycle. We feared them lost to space accidents or natural predators. Not accidents, Eliza said quietly. Deliberate targeting. A soft chime interrupted them, Eliza's medical monitor alerting her to changes in the juvenile's condition. She quickly checked the readings and felt her blood run cold. Something's interfering with their containment field, she said, already moving toward the door. Someone's trying to finish what they started. They raced through the station's corridors. When they reached the treatment bay, Eliza's worst fears were confirmed. The environmental controls had been remotely tampered with. The juvenile's matrices were destabilizing rapidly. Override code Alpha 94, she shouted at the control panel. Nothing happened. They've locked us out, Powell said, already calling for backup. Through the observation window, they could see the young Luminari's light flickering dangerously, their bodies starting to fracture again. Ambassador Vexler pressed against the window, their form resonating with their children's distress. Can nothing be done? They asked, their translator struggling to convey the depth of their anguish. Eliza looked at the sealed door, at the failing juveniles, at the ambassador's desperate form. She made a decision that would either end her career or save 5 lives. Commander, I'm about to commit several serious violations of station protocol, she said quietly. Wolf met her gaze steadily. Sometimes protocol gets in the way of justice, Doctor. Do what you need to do. Eliza pulled an emergency override device from her medical kit, equipment that was definitely not standard issue. She'd developed it after one too many bureaucratic delays had cost patients their lives. As she worked on the door controls, she spoke to Vexler. Ambassador, I need you to understand something about humans. Everyone thinks we're this fragile species that somehow survived through intelligence and tool use, but that's not quite right. The device sparked as it interfaced with the door systems. We survived because when something threatens those we've chosen to protect, we become something else entirely. The door slid open with a hiss of protest. Eliza rushed to the environmental controls, her illegal device already reconfiguring to interface with the system. Whoever had orchestrated this had counted on station protocols and regulations to slow down any response. They hadn't counted on a human who'd spent her career preparing for exactly this kind of emergency. Hang on, little ones, she muttered, fingers flying across the controls. We're not letting you go without a fight. What happened next would be talked about in whispered tones throughout the station for years to come. How the quiet human doctor disabled 3 separate security systems, rewrote environmental protocols on the fly, and stabilized 5 dying Luminari younglings while simultaneously leaving enough of an electronic trail to identify the perpetrators. As the juvenile's matrices finally stabilized, Eliza turned to find Vexler studying her with an unreadable pattern of colors playing across their surface. The signal trying to kill these children came from Director Maddox's private terminal, she said, pulling up the trace from her override device. Powell was already calling for a security team, but Commander Wolf held up a hand. Not yet, she said. If we move against Maddox directly, we risk alerting his entire network. We need to uncover the full extent of this operation first. These children nearly died, Eliza protested. And now they're under our protection, Wolf countered. But there could be hundreds more we don't know about. We need to be strategic. Ambassador Vexler moved forward, their form pulsing with new colors. Dr. Morgan, the Luminari Collective has long wondered why humans were granted such high status in the galactic community despite their apparent physical limitations. Eliza checked the juveniles' readings once more. They were sleeping now, their matrices glowing with healthy light. I believe we begin to understand, Vexler continued. When you protect, you become something magnificent and terrible. Director Maddox just tried to murder children to cover his tracks, Eliza said quietly. He's about to learn exactly how terrible we can be. 3 days later, Nexus Station's central plaza buzzed with its usual activity. Merchants hawking exotic goods, diplomats engaged in careful negotiations, maintenance crews working on the ornate fountain at the center. No one paid particular attention to the small group scattered strategically throughout the area. Discovery and defiance. The emergency alert pulled Dr. Eliza Morgan from deep concentration, the holographic display of bacterial cultures vanishing as her lab system prioritized the incoming message. As chief xenobiologist aboard Nexus Station, the massive human-alien joint venture orbiting the diplomatic neutral zone, she was accustomed to urgent consultations. Yet something in the AI's tone made her heart quicken. Dr. Morgan, immediate assistance required in Cargo Bay 14. Unauthorized biological signatures detected during routine scan. Life forms in critical condition. Eliza grabbed her medical kit, already making mental calculations about which species might be involved. Nexus Station housed representatives from 27 different civilizations, each with unique biological needs. As she raced through the station's curved corridors, her mind cycled through possible scenarios. When she reached Cargo Bay 14, the security team had established a perimeter. Lieutenant Darius Powell, head of station security, noticed her arrival and signaled her forward, his dark eyes serious beneath cropped silver hair. "Doctor, we've got a situation I've never seen before," he said, lowering his voice. "Shipping container from the Rigelian trade route. Manifests as industrial components, but scans picked up life signs." "What kind?" Eliza asked, pulling on biohazard gloves. "That's just it," Powell said, his expression troubled. "They're Luminari." Eliza froze. The Luminari were one of the most secretive species in known space, their crystalline bodies housing complex neural networks that made them natural information processors. They rarely left their home system, and their young were never, ever sent off-world. "Show me," she said. The container's false panel had been removed, revealing an internal compartment lined with substandard environmental regulators. Inside, 5 juvenile Luminari huddled together, their normally brilliant bodies dulled to a sickly gray, fracture lines visible across their crystalline surfaces. "They're dying," Eliza whispered, scanning them quickly. "Their matrix integrity is collapsing." She turned to Powell. "I need an emergency photon bath and crystal stabilizers immediately, and get me a direct link to the Luminari representative." As Powell barked orders, Eliza carefully approached the young Luminari. Their consciousness existed as light patterns within their crystalline forms, patterns that were currently flickering dangerously. "It's all right," she said softly, though she wasn't sure they could understand her. "We're going to help you." One of the Luminari pulsed weakly, a pattern that her translator struggled to interpret before rendering, hurt, taken, dark. "You're safe now," Eliza promised, as medical technicians arrived with the equipment she'd requested. "No one will hurt you anymore." The next hours passed in a blur as Eliza fought to stabilize the Luminari young. Their condition was worse than she'd initially feared, not just neglect or improper transport conditions, but evidence of deliberate harm. Someone had been extracting crystalline fragments from their bodies, causing traumatic fractures that threatened their entire neural structure. By the time Ambassador Vexler arrived, Eliza had managed to stabilize 4 of the juveniles. The 5th remained critical, its light patterns erratic. The Luminari ambassador's own crystalline form shifted through colors of shock and rage as they approached the medical bay's observation window. "Who would do this?" Vexler's translator rendered, their form pulsing with patterns that needed no interpretation. Grief, horror, fury. "The container was registered to Helios Quantum Technologies," Powell said, checking his data pad. But the authorization codes trace back to someone on this station. Eliza looked up sharply. What? Override codes with executive clearance, someone high up. Vexler's form flashed a color so intense that human eyes could barely process it. You are saying that someone in your station's administration is trafficking Luminari children. I'm saying we have evidence suggesting that, Powell replied carefully, and I intend to follow it wherever it leads. The critical juvenile suddenly emitted a high-pitched tone that made all the medical instruments squeal. Its light flickered dangerously. No, 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 Eliza muttered, rushing back to the juvenile's side. The specialized treatment wasn't working fast enough. The damage was too extensive. She made a split-second decision. I'm initiating experimental protocol XM7, she announced, already typing commands into the medical system. It's not approved for general use yet, but it's their only chance. Powell frowned. Doctor, that's against station. Note my violation of procedure in your report, Eliza snapped, not looking up. After we saved their lives. The experimental protocol involved a specialized resonance field that would temporarily support the Luminari's failing matrix while accelerating crystal regeneration. It was incredibly complex and still in testing phases, the kind of procedure that required multiple approvals from ethics committees and administrators. Approvals she didn't have time to get. As the resonance field activated, the young Luminari's erratic pulses slowly steadied. The fracture lines in their crystalline body began to seal at the molecular level. Eliza held her breath, watching the monitors carefully. After several tense minutes, all 5 juveniles showed signs of stabilization. Eliza exhaled shakily, only then becoming aware of how quiet the room had become. Ambassador Vexler stood directly behind her. Their form shifted into a pattern Eliza had never seen before. Dr. Morgan, the ambassador's translator rendered. The Luminari Collective has often questioned why humans, physically fragile as you are, were granted such high diplomatic status when you joined the galactic community. Eliza remained silent, suddenly aware that this might become a diplomatic incident. Unauthorized experimental procedures on Luminari young could strain already tenuous relations. I believe we begin to understand, Vexler continued, their form shifting to new colors. When you protect, you become something magnificent. Powell cleared his throat. Ambassador, these children may be the key to uncovering a major trafficking network. Would you permit Dr. Morgan to continue treating them while we investigate? I would permit nothing less, Vexler replied, and I request to join your investigation. These are our young. Eliza looked at the now stable Luminari children, a cold anger crystallizing in her chest. Someone on this station authorized this, she said quietly. Someone decided these children were expendable. The shipping manifest shows this wasn't an isolated incident, Powell added. There are records of 12 similar containers in the past 3 months. Vexler's form pulsed with renewed outrage. How many of our young have been stolen? How many lost? We're going to find out, Eliza promised, checking the juvenile's readings one more time. And we're going to stop it. What none of them knew then was that this moment would spark a chain of events that would reshape galactic society's understanding of humanity. They were about to learn why humans, despite their physical limitations, had earned a reputation as the most determined protectors in known space. But for now, Eliza focused on her patients, unaware that her very human response to their plight would soon become legendary among the stars. The real battle had just begun, a battle against corruption that reached to the highest levels of the station and beyond. In the darkened administrative wing of Nexus Station, Director Maddox reviewed the security alert with growing concern. The discovery in Cargo Bay 14 threatened everything. With a few keystrokes, he began erasing records, rerouting authorization codes, preparing contingencies. The troublesome Dr. Morgan would need to be dealt with. Humans were so predictably sentimental about children, even alien ones. It made them weak. Or so he thought. He would soon learn that he had fundamentally misunderstood humanity's greatest strength. For when humans found something to protect, they became unstoppable. And Eliza Morgan had just found her cause.